So
Yeah. Well, and it's you have some great tips for people for finding those journals and that information. Now, unfortunately, I shouldn't say most, but several people don't have access to a university database where they might have access to journals and whatnot. But for the average person, do you have any recommendations for how they can find studies that might cover the species they're looking for?
yes, absolutely. So in actuality, given the nature of the World Wide Web today, if anybody still calls it that, there's this thing called Google Scholar, which, there's people listening to this being like, of course there's Google Scholar. But anybody has access to Google Scholar. All you literally do is open up Google and type in Google Scholar, and then boom, it pops up. And if you put the key phrases that I talk about in my article into Google Scholar, and then you fill in the void with the species name of the herp you're keeping, those search all the same literary databases that universities have access to, and you will get a return. The problem is actually getting your hands on the publication. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to, flat out tell people how to do that. I'm simply going to say there are now ways that you can get your hands on those journal articles where you don't necessarily have to be affiliated with a university to do so. And one of those ways is there's a wonderful site called ResearchGate, and ResearchGate is like social media for academics. And so when we publish papers, lots of active authors will have a ResearchGate page. And if you can find them on ResearchGate page, their publications are right there. Mm-hmm. So in the case of the feeding study that I was talking about, that's where I found it. I was able to find out that it existed through Google Scholar. I then took the title, put that into Google and searched it, and it popped up on the ResearchGate page. And then I went to the page, was able to download the PDF, and that didn't involve a university website at all. Mm-hmm. In the case of the publication that was the ecology paper, I was able to go and find the main author, and I contacted him through ResearchGate and said, please, if you have a PDF of this paper, I would love to have a copy of it. And then he sent it to me. The problem was it was in Spanish, and mm-hmm. I can't speak that. So
that's a big problem.
Yeah, I just copied the whole thing, and Google has a translator. So I dumped it into the translator, and I don't want to give the impression it translated 100%. I had to, some of it was definitely broken English, but it absolutely translated enough for me to get the information that I needed. And so I was able to get these two papers just through the, access that pretty much anybody has access to as long as they have the internet. Mm-hmm. And if I always say where there's a will, there's a way. If you scramble and ask questions and don't be afraid to reach out to the author, I can flat out tell you, as the author of those papers, we don't write these things for ourselves. We're writing this to get it out into the world. So 9 times out of 10, if you're able to get a hold of somebody and email them directly, be polite about it. If they have easy access to the PDF, they'll just dump it in a response and send it out. And then open access papers. This paper is a great example of that. I purposely sought out a journal that I knew if I published the paper, anybody on planet Earth that had access to the internet could get it. So there's definitely ways to go about getting these papers outside of a university.
And yeah, those are fantastic tips. And some of those terms that you say in the paper to use, I think it's ecology of, there's a few other great ones. What are some other ones? Do you know them off the top of your head?
Yes. So that was one of the things where my training as an ecologist was beneficial. Mm-hmm. So classic natural history papers will oftentimes have key phrases in the titles that are present for if the research on a bird, a crayfish, a snake, a fish, or whatever, and then you basically have like this beginning to the phrase, and then you just fill in the blank with the species in question. And that was one of the parts that I realized a lot of herpetoculturists may not know. Mm-hmm. And if they knew these key phrases and they knew to search for them, you might find a wonderful publication on the animal you're interested in. So for us as people maintaining reptiles in human care, one thing we're very interested in is just basically the environment where they live. So that's where you could type in, distribution of, and then put in your species, or ecology of, biology of. Those are going to be publications that take one population and really kind of dive into the nuts and bolts of its biology at that particular place. those, in my opinion, are invaluable if you're going to be trying to come up with a care plan. If you're interested in diet, obviously, diet of, feeding biology of, those are some key phrases then put in your animal that can be real important for you as well. And then the other thing that's also important is, well, we would love for taxonomy to be stagnant. The Latin names of these animals change all the time. Mm-hmm. So it's important that you know where to go to actually see, like, what's the history of the Latin name of this animal, because it might be valuable to search an old genus species name versus the current species, genus species name. And so where you can go to get that is there's a wonderful website called the Reptile Database, and it'll have what we as biologists call a synonymy, or basically a list of synonyms, which are basically all the Latin names that have ever been used for this particular species. And so if you do one of these searches using the most recent common Latin name, you may not get a hit. Whereas if you use the name that it had forever, you may get a hit. So a great example might be if you're interested in the biology of North American rat snakes. They were in the genus Elaphai up until the early 2000s. So you might type ecology of Elaphai obsoleta. That's the black rat snake. In 2003, 4-ish, that's when they got put into the genus Pantherophis. So you would also do the search for ecology of Pantherophis obsoletus, or Pantherophis spiloides, or Pantherophis alleghaniensis. Those are all rat snakes now. So don't just do one search. Do all searches with all names, and then do one with the common name, and you'll be surprised at what you can find.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And then the other website that I thought was great was the weatherspark.com, which is, I think, where you get most of your climate data from.
Yes, WeatherSpark. When I stumbled into WeatherSpark, I questioned. You can hear me stuttering. Like, why doesn't herpetoculture scream from the mountaintops that this website exists? I mean, it was
because there's care sheets.
It was wonderful, because if you're able to find a location, you can then find the nearest large city for your species in question. And then a lot of websites will give you the temperature data of a given location. Like, that's easy. What WeatherSpark does is it gives you these beautifully, illustrated graphs for the whole calendar year. And you're able to really see, like, what's the seasonal change in temperature, what's the seasonal change in relative humidity. And then there's other graphs in there. There's graphs like what's the daylight cycle, how rain levels, when does this place get inundated with rain, and when does this place become a localized desert, all that kind of really awesome climate data, which is directly 100% applicable to your care. So I found WeatherSpark back in the day, and I actually used it to generate my husbandry, strategy for hydrogenastes, and it ended up working out really, really well. But the issue there is, well, how do I know where this animal lives? And obviously you can look for it, but there's websites where you can find that. So iNaturalist is a great example of that. You can type in the Latin name of an animal, and through citizen science, people go out into the world. Everybody can take pictures with their phone. So you take a picture with your phone, you upload it into iNaturalist, and then when you do a search, up pops the picture, and now you have that location data. But you can also use museum collections, and that scares people. You think that that's fancy. I got to have degree. You don't have to have degrees to do that. If you can do an internet search, you can search these. So there's a great one called VertNet, and you search for VertNet, and it pops up, and you just simply put in the Latin name of your animal. And then what will end up happening is you'll get these distribution records back, and you're able to see, okay, well, there's quite a few rainbow boas collected from this location in Brazil. So I can take that location in Brazil and make an assumption that this is a good area to base my husbandry technique for Epicrates off of. So I'm going to go to WeatherSpark now and do a search, and then I can get that information, which I can then use to drive my husbandry or question your husbandry. Because if you've been keeping things one way forever, have you ever asked yourself, why am I doing it this way? So that's the evidence-based part to this. So, if you're trying to answer, if your animal goes off food or it seems stressed, you might have a climactic issue. You can go there and figure it out maybe.
And I think it's a good exercise no matter what. If you've been keeping an animal successfully for a decade, it'd be good to go through this and then just give yourself a little brush up. Like, maybe there's some things I can change here, because those care sheets that we have in the hobby are these step-by-step cookie cutter things that, like you're saying, are often wrong. We end up caring for animals in the way that just happens to work, but it might not be right.
Absolutely. And this challenges all of that. And then, dare I say it, it's actually fun. Like,
yeah.
If you're into this, you're probably, whether we want to admit it or not, a little bit of a geek and a nerd. And this is the way that you can really geek out on the care of your animal. And I have found it to be, it is far more rewarding, in my opinion, if as a keeper, if you know all the biology, you know all the kind of ecology of this animal, what it's actually doing out in nature, and you know that, and then you know the climatic environment of where this animal lives, you're going to immediately, by just absolute default, question what you're doing. And that's the whole point to the manuscript that I put up here, because we should be making these decisions based off of evidence. We shouldn't necessarily be making them off of, the fact that this is the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
So
exactly. So, and of course, the $1 million question with all of this is, does welfare increase? And that's what you also covered that in your paper as well. So what are some ways that you measured that as best you could? Because that's another tough thing to measure of welfare actually increasing following this framework.
Yeah, so welfare was an interesting aspect to this, given that this was a publication coming out of a zoo-based